This is Jim Beaver from Supernatural and Deadwood. You're listening to my interview with Elaine Goodman on Gogoodman.com.au.
Your original family name was de Bouvier, but when your family left Germany in the 18th century, the family name got changed to Beaver. Are you glad that didn't stick?
Well, I don't know. There's something sort of cool about James de Beauvoir, but it's certainly a lot easier signing autographs with the shorter version. But, I caught a lot of flack as a kid for my last name, but I've discovered that as I've gotten older, mature people don't give me too much trouble. So, it seems to be a name that people remember, so I guess that's good.
But it could have been Bieber. You could have been related to Justin Bieber, or people could have made that mistake. Would that have been something you would have got annoyed with?
Oh, I don't know. I try not to get annoyed by things very much, but I suspect that he and I are very distant cousins because one branch of the family did go up into Canada, and I'd be surprised if there wasn't a link somewhere back down the line, but I don't know of any direct link. So, but if he wants to leave me all his money, that's fine with me.
Yeah, good point. Growing up in Texas in the 50s and 60s, what kind of career paths were on offer to you? I know you went into the Marines, but I can't imagine too many entertainers came out of Texas during that period.
Oh, I don't know. I think there's quite a bunch of us. But, I don't know. I don't know how many. There were an awful lot of musicians came out of there. I went to high school with the drummer from ZZ Top, and a lot of musicians I know came out of my part of Texas, and but I don't know exactly what I thought I was going to be when I grew up, but I know I thought a little about writing, and there was a brief time I had a notion that I was going to be a stuntman, but I never really was in a position to make any of that stuff happen. I wrote a lot when I was in high school. I wrote a lot of short stories and things, but by the time I got out of high school, I kind of wanted to be a film historian because I didn't realize there wasn't any money in that. So, but it's always been a great love of mine, film history, and it indirectly led me to becoming an actor. So it's all good.
Do you remember where your love of film history came from? Can you pinpoint a certain movie or a certain actor that got you into film history? Yeah,
pretty easily. I was as a young teenager, maybe even before that, I was a huge John Wayne fan. I just worshipped him. I saw everything he was in as often as I could, and I began to make an effort to watch every movie that came on television that he was in. And then over the course of time, I began to realize that there were other actors that were in his movies that I found interesting, and I would start trying to watch all the movies they were in. And that just sort of rippled until I had this list of about 150 actors that I was watching everything I could possibly see that they were in, which meant I was watching almost everything that came on television.
How did you get access to all their movies? Because apart from television, was there anything like a VHS or a video? How did you see all those movies?
It was whatever came on television. But in those days, in the States at least, there were 8 or 10 or 12 movies on television every day. So, 2 or 3, there were usually only 4 4 or 5 stations in any given city, but probably 3 of those had a movie on at some time all through the day. So there was no way to record anything. There was no way to go down to a store and rent it. There was certainly no way to download it. There was nothing to download it on. But there was a lot of movies on television, and I got to the point where I was watching them all. I got to the point where I was skipping school to watch movies. So I was pretty hooked. I was pretty hooked as a teenager.
Did that?
And somewhere in the course of that, I just got interested in the people who made the movies and how they got made, and I got really deep into film history. And like I said, I had no idea that you couldn't make a living at it, but and I still dabble in it, more than dabble, I guess. I'm still very involved in research, and I contribute to the IMDb a lot, and it's very much my other career. I tend to think of myself as having 2 simultaneous careers.
Your IMDb trivia page was very helpful to me as well.
Well, you can believe some of that stuff, I suppose. But...
Through the 70s, you moved around the Texas, Oklahoma area, gaining a lot of experience in theatre, which is where you started, which is where a lot of actors start their careers. Why is theatre such a good place to begin an acting career?
Well, it's where you learn all your basics. It's where, and certainly in university theater, you get to make a lot of mistakes, and it doesn't cost you your career. You're constantly working on one or more shows in college, and you get to play all kinds of roles that you will probably never get to play professionally, because in colleges they were usually willing to let people stretch and do things that are kind of outside the range that might be imposed on you by professionals. For me, it was a place to learn about the history of the art and about the way theater developed over the years, and how acting techniques developed over the years. But the biggest thing is that it's pretty easy to get a part in a play compared to getting a part in a television show or a movie. Somebody's, even if it's just community theater, somebody's doing a play somewhere that you can get a small part in if you're interested. If you're devoted and you've got a little bit to bring to the table, you can get a lot of practice in the theater. And if you wait until if you decide you're only going to act in television, it may be really hard to get experience, because there's so much more money involved in producing television and films. Nobody wants to give people who have no experience a chance most of the time. But you can get those chances all the time in a theater.
I want to backtrack just a second back to your interest in your history interest into Hollywood history. I'm very interested in the history of comedy, and I think it's because there's so many different emotions. There's happiness, there's sadness, there's depression, there's life, there's death, there's all different kinds of emotions and situations throughout the history of comedy. And I think that's what draws my interest to it. Is that the same with the history, I guess, of Hollywood? Is that what takes your interest?
Well, I guess so. I don't. If you mean the history of comedy in the sense of comedians and comics and comedy actors, I suppose so. I'm not as familiar with all of those worlds, except where they intersect with the world of movies. But I'm drawn to history. Period. I'm a very big history buff. I read a great deal of history and biography, and it's hard for me to articulate. I just like it. I like reading about it. I like reading about movies almost as much as I like watching them. I like reading actors and directors' biographies. I like to see how people got from where they started to where they ended up. So it's and one of the reasons I like film history is discovering new films. I'll read about a certain actor and discover some film they made that I wasn't aware of, and I'll track it down and see it, and it widens my horizons that way. There's also probably a kind of OCD aspect. I like keeping track of credits, and I like tracking down obscure credits, things that people were in that nobody knows about. I enjoy the rote work of compiling information too. So I don't know. I'm probably kind of weird, but
I think I'm similar. I have a collection that's building. So far, I've got like maybe 40 or 50 autobiographies from all different like athletes, musicians, comedians, actors, and it's just building up. And I'm getting through them. I've almost finished Rodney Dangerfield's autobiography, which is really interesting. I've got a list. And I'm trying to order them which one to read next, because I just got the history of Jay Leno's Tonight Show, a behind-the-scenes look at Jay Leno's Tonight Show. So things like that interest me because there's all different emotions. It looks happy from the outside, but if you dig deeper, there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of success, there's a lot of failure, and I think that's what I like about it. There's all different emotions. Yeah,
I absolutely agree on that. It's always interesting to me to find out what kind of people these public figures are, what kind of lives they led off camera, because there are so many aspects to any human's life that don't show up in their public persona, and I like the feeling of being behind closed doors and knowing a little more than what the average Joe on the street might know about somebody.
I think we're similar, Jim. I think we're similar. Let's get on with the interview, otherwise we could be here all day.
Yeah.
Your film and TV credits started to come in the late 70s, around 77, 78. What was your impression of Hollywood back then?
Well, I wasn't in Hollywood back then. Most of those early credits were things I did in Dallas, which was the area where I grew up. And at that time, there was a lot of film and television work being produced in the Dallas area. They had sort of discovered that labor was fairly cheap there, and that there were good locations. And so the Dallas TV series shot a lot there. There were movies like Silkwood and Semi-Tough that came to Texas to film, and so I was getting small parts in local movies. So I had visited Hollywood when I was in the Marines, but it was many years before I worked there. So my experience of Hollywood was with Hollywood coming to Texas. And most of the stuff I was doing was bit parts and extra work. It was just a chance to be on a film set, which I found thrilling, and I still do. They feed me better now that I'm not an extra, but I'm still excited always to walk onto a set. But I remember very clearly the first sets I was on, I was in heaven, even though a lot of it. I very quickly learned that the predominant experience on a film set is boredom, because there's so much sitting around waiting. And but even that, it doesn't seem to bother me. I'm very happy on a set, and I got to meet some people. I got to to interact a little tiny bit with some stars, and I felt like I was part of something, even if I just had a bit. And I still feel that way.
Can I ask, what year did John Wayne die?
John Wayne died in June of 1979.
So did you ever get to meet him?
I met him a couple of times. It wasn't much of a meeting either time. It was basically shaking his hand and getting an autograph. But I did get to meet him a couple of times, and that was an amazing experience for me. He and my dad were my two role models in life, and while I grew to have extremely different political views than he had, as a young man, I just worshipped him. And as I've grown, I admire him so much as a film actor. I think he had a rather self-imposed limited range. He didn't step outside of a narrow range of roles very often, especially in his later years. But within that range, I think he was one of the greatest film actors ever born. And he doesn't get a lot of credit for that, but I probably stolen more from John Wayne than any other actor ever. There's just ways the way he acted with his eyes, the way he considered things before he spoke, the way he handled his body, the way he gestured. I found him a marvelous film actor, and and I steal bits from him. I steal bits from lots of actors, but probably, I don't know, maybe I've stolen as much from James Cagney or Robert Duvall, but Laurence Olivier said that true genius consists of knowing who to steal from, and I've stolen from him too. So.
Okay, let's not mention any more names, otherwise you might get yourself in trouble. In 1979, you moved to New York and worked in dinner theatre, but also as a film critic and writer. Did being a critic give you an insight into what kind of actor you wanted to be?
Well, it made me want to be a good one, and it made me want to be good enough that I was critic-proof.
That's impossible.
I don't know that I thought about it. I know that there's an awful lot to the process of acting that critics, for the most part, know nothing about, and it's real easy to judge a performance based on what you think it should have been, and completely ignore the process the actor might have gone through in deciding to do it the way he did. It's because a critic sees a movie for 2 hours and then starts making all kinds of decisions about it. Whereas an actor or a director or writer, they spend months preparing and thinking and working through how best to do something. And I discovered as a critic that it's real easy to decide in a matter of 2 hours that you know better than the people who made the thing. That's not to say critics are wrong, but they're often making snap judgments on things that were deeply and richly deliberated over a long period of time. And as if those decisions were just as rapid and snap as the ones the critic has just made. So, I've never really thought much about it consciously, but I look back and I say there were times when I dismissed a performance just because it wasn't my idea of how it should have been played. Doesn't mean it may well have been a better way of performing it, but I kind of dismissed it because that's not how I would have done it. And I try not to be so quick to judge, partly because of my own feelings as a critic. I realize that it's way too easy to judge quickly.
And on a trip to LA to write an article on George Reeves, which is a whole other story in itself, and I've got a question about that later, you got your start in Hollywood as a writer. In that short period, you wrote for shows like Vietnam War Story and Tour of Duty, but straight out of school, as we mentioned before, you went to Vietnam with the Marines. Did the real-life war experience help you with your writing?
Well, it certainly helped me with my writing career because quite a number of the first jobs I got because I was a Vietnam vet, and they were looking for veterans who could write for these various TV shows about Vietnam. So in that sense, I was kind of in the right place at the right time with the right credentials. Frankly, it was nice to be welcomed in simply because I had a background that they considered helpful to writing, and I probably wouldn't have gotten in some of those doors if it weren't for that. If they had been doing shows about completely different topics, I probably would not have gotten my foot in the door because I didn't have any great experience. But in the mid to late 80s, there weren't a lot of Vietnam vets who were writing in Hollywood, and to be one meant that a lot of doors opened up for you. It certainly colored my experience when I was writing those shows because I could write from a place of experience and knowledge and understanding, and I was happy to be able to bring an authenticity to those stories that a non-veteran wouldn't have been able to access. So, I think it was, I wish there hadn't been a war, and I kind of wish I hadn't been in it, but since those things did occur, I'm happy I was able to create something of use out of it. That's one of my big credos is, even bad things can be the source of gifts or better things if you work them right.
You continued writing and acting in the theatre till 1988 when you scored a role alongside Bruce Willis in a production called Country. At this point, you decided to give up television writing and focus on acting. Why then?
Well, I had always focused my goals on acting. I wrote because I could, because I appeared to be fairly good at it, and because I had opportunities. But as soon as opportunities arose for me to act, that was my first love. And it was a pretty easy decision to make, but it also kind of got made for me because the television writing business in Hollywood changed rather drastically around that same time. And the kind of freelance work I had been doing became really scarce. And most freelance TV writers just stopped working. And I stopped working. And it had nothing to do with a choice to go concentrate on acting. It was serendipitous. The TV writing dried up for freelance writers at the same time I got a break as an actor. So I had a career where I was making pretty good money as a TV writer, and it stopped suddenly, and I never made another dime writing for television after 1988. But fortunately, the door to an acting career opened up that same year, and I financially never missed a beat, even though I completely lost one career and was brand new in another one. So it was all really a matter of timing and luck. It wasn't a choice, I'm going to quit writing and go act. I had always chosen to act over writing, but for a while there, writing was the only opportunity I had.
Over the next, we're going to skip ahead so we're not here all day because you do have a long and illustrious career. Over the next almost...
Isn't that weird?
Sorry?
I said, isn't that weird?
No, I mean, I like interviewing people that do have long careers, but at some stage you've got to skip over a bit so we're not here for
Yeah.
2.5 hours or 3 hours. So this is the bit. Over the next almost 15 years, you guest starred in so many shows covering all genres, like Third Rock from the Sun, that 70s show, Lois and Clark, NYPD Blue, The Young and the Restless, Days of Our Lives, Monk, just to name a few. What struggles, if any, did you face trying to adapt to every genre imaginable?
I don't really think there was any struggle adapting to the genres. To me, it's all acting. It's all different genres, particularly comedy, require a slightly different style, but it still all draws on the same instincts within you. I find as much comedy as I can in my serious roles, if it's appropriate. And I'm the sort of person who finds a certain amount of comedy in just about everything. I've told some pretty good jokes at funerals. I don't really see a lot of difference other than in some details of technique. When you're doing a situation comedy in front of a live audience, there's certain things you do. You say the punchline to a joke and you stand very still, because movement can distract from the joke. That's little technical stuff. In terms of real performance, I don't find much difference at all, certainly not challenges. There was a time when nobody thought I could do a comedy, because all I had done was serious stuff. And then I got cast on a sitcom, and for a while nobody thought I could do serious stuff because I was on a sitcom. Those are challenges, but they have more to do with other people's perceptions than of my own. I always felt comfortable. I feel very comfortable in drama. I feel very comfortable in comedy. I feel very comfortable on stage. I feel very comfortable in front of a camera. It's all kind of one big thing to me. And it's not... it's sort of like looking at a plate of steak and potatoes and salad, and there's no challenge in switching from the salad to the potatoes. You just switch. It's all eating. Other actors may have a different feeling, different approach. I've always felt that there are as many approaches to acting as there are actors. My approach is, it's just one thing. It's just one big thing with some of it's colored one way, some of it's colored another, but it's all acting.
So the critics were critiquing you in saying that you were destined for one genre and not another genre. Did that kind of hit home with you, having been a critic in the past?
Well, first off, it wasn't critics. Critics weren't paying any attention to me whatsoever. It was mainly within the business. Casting directors would not call me in for certain kinds of shows because they thought of me only for other kinds of shows. The fact of the matter is, for the most part, nobody was thinking of me. I was not well known. I didn't have much name at all. But every once in a while, I would hear that a casting director didn't want to see me for a certain show because she didn't think I could do that kind. In retrospect, I found a lot of it funny because I had never been able to get cast as a guest on a sitcom, and I had one casting director call my agents and say, "I thought you said this guy was funny," and apparently I had done a terrible job at the audition, and she would never see me for a comedy again. And then the very first series I had was a comedy. And I wanted to invite her to a taping one night and show her, there I was, one of the stars of the show. And it wasn't a drama. As far as critics go, critics haven't paid much attention to my career until the last few years.
Over the next couple of years, so this is now into the 2000s, you cemented yourself in the pop culture circles with 35 episodes in 3 years on Deadwood and 58 episodes in 10 years on Supernatural. After a lot of cameo appearances, finding not one but two roles that have an effect on fans in Whitney Ellsworth and Bobby Singer, was that a relief knowing that you'd established a couple of memorable characters?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my whole world changed when I was cast in Deadwood. It was, first off, it was the greatest role on camera that anybody had ever offered me. An amazing, wonderful, rich, full, delightful role to play. And the fact that we were kind of a critic's darling as a show was wonderful. Even more wonderful was the fact that people in the industry paid very close attention to the show, and I began to get work purely because I had been on Deadwood. And then with Supernatural, it was a different effect because it wasn't a show that was closely watched by the industry. I've gone in for meetings and they say, "So what have you been doing?" And I say, "Well, I've been doing Supernatural." And they say, "What's that?" And I say, "It's a show on the CW." And they say, "Oh, is it new?" And I said, "No, it's in its 10th season." They go, 10 years? I never heard of it. But let me tell you, people all over the world have heard of it, even if the industry's not paying close attention. So I don't know that I've ever gotten much work because I was on Supernatural. I got a lot of work because I was on Deadwood. But I've certainly got a lot of attention around the world from fans because of Supernatural. And the fact that you're doing this interview with me is just one bit of evidence of how much things changed when those two shows came along. Because people ask me a lot if I'm bothered by fans talking to me or asking me for pictures or autographs or to chat with me, and I always say, up until 12 years ago, nobody cared what I did or didn't do. Nobody wanted to talk to me, so I'm delighted that anybody would be interested now. I always say I wouldn't walk across the street to see me, but I'm really grateful that there are people who feel differently. Yeah, it's been those two shows in particular changed my life drastically and for the much, much better.
And because of those two roles, you are now on the very, very popular convention circuit, and you recently came out to Australia in the last few months. You came out to Australia for Comic-Con, and I think you were in Sydney. Did you go to Perth as well?
No, I was in Sydney and Brisbane.
Sydney and Brisbane. Right. So what did you think of the Australian crowd? What was your impression of the land down under of my country?
Well, this was my fourth trip to Australia, always for a convention. I absolutely love the Australian people. I have so much fun with them. They're rowdy in just the right way, and they're smart and interesting, and I have so much fun going to Australia. My only regret is that I've never really gotten a chance to see much of the country. I end up going to these events, and I spend the weekend in a city meeting people in a convention hall, and then either flying to another city to do the same thing there or flying home. So I haven't had the chance to, just spend a couple of weeks touring around the country. And I keep saying one of these days I'm going to come back and I'm going to build in an extra couple of weeks into the trip in my schedule so that I can actually see the place. I've seen very little of Australia outside of the downtowns of Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. I like those places, but it's you can't spend all of your time in the downtown section of cities and feel like you've seen the country. So I got to tell you, my first trip there, I had no real concept of the geography, and I had one day off, and I thought, I was in Melbourne. I had one day off, and I thought, well, maybe I'll rent a car and drive to Alice Springs for the afternoon. Because I had heard of Alice Springs, and I thought that seemed like maybe an interesting place. And I had no concept of the size of the country. I have a very good concept of it now.
Yeah, it's like living in California and driving to Connecticut for the day.
Yeah, that's what I thought I was do, and some people laughed uproariously at me, and so I didn't try to pull that off. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll get a few days and make that drive. I think it might be kind of silly, but I love when I'm going to conventions. I usually do try to build in some extra time to the trip so I can see the country. If somebody's going to be kind enough to bring me to their country, I want to see it. And I just haven't quite had the same opportunity in Australia.
Have you been anywhere else outside America for a convention?
Oh yeah, I've done a number of conventions in Europe, and I have had the opportunity there. I've often the conventions in Europe, there'll be 2 or 3 spread over the course of a month or two, which means I can go to a convention in Rome, and then I spend a couple of weeks driving around Europe before I have a convention in England. So I've taken a lot of advantage of that. Spent a lot of time driving around Europe on days off, and I've gotten to see an immense amount of Europe, which I really like. But the schedules have just never quite worked out the same for Australia. Also, it seems like every time I get down under, I'm there when it's cold and wet, and it's not quite as conducive to getting out and about. So it's part of the problem with your winter being our summer and vice versa. But one of these days, I'm going to spend an awful lot of time in Australia because it's always fascinated me. It fascinated me when I was a kid. Even when I was a teenager, I used to fantasize about moving to Australia, and haven't quite pulled that off yet. But who knows? It ain't over yet.
In the almost 40 years that you've been on screen, how has the industry changed? Obviously, the introduction of social media has had a massive impact, but what else has caught your attention?
Well, the biggest change has been in the last few years when it's become immensely more affordable to make a movie. Cameras and digital equipment have changed enough so that you can make a pretty decent-looking movie on your iPhone. And with a camera costing only a few $100s, you can make a really good-looking movie. And it's allowed people who would never have been able to get funding to make some interesting projects. And I've been fortunate enough to occasionally be involved with projects that friends were making that the entire budget of the movie wouldn't be equal the craft service budget on Crimson Peak. And to be able to know that you can actually shoot something and create it and edit it and enhance the sound and the color and put it out there on the internet and people can see it and you can build an audience for it without going broke or without getting a bank involved is the hugest change in the industry that I've seen in my whole time. I made a short film myself of 3 or 4 years ago, and 20 years ago, if you'd told me that I was going to pull it together to make a film of any kind on my own without borrowing money, I would have thought you were crazy. But anybody can do it now, and it's changing the business because you can put up a video on YouTube that gets you a deal with a studio to do a series or to do a film. So you don't the old path of writing a script and trying to get it to an agent or to a studio and hoping somebody likes it enough to pass it on up the ladder. That path is still there, but it's not the only path anymore.
Can you talk about the introduction of social media, especially being someone who's cracked into the pop culture scene, and you do the convention circuits, and as you said, you have fans coming up to you and you sign autographs and everything like that. How useful or how much of a surprise was social media when it got introduced and you started using it? Did it make life easier or harder?
Well, it made a lot of life easier in a sense. It certainly made it easier to promote things that I was involved with. I remember years ago producing a play that I wrote and typing letters, hundreds and hundreds of letters to send out to people. And every letter had to be different. It had to be on a different sheet of paper. And it had to be in a different envelope. It had to have a stamp on it. And it, sending it out to people, asking them to come see the play or to contribute to the budget or whatever. It was a massive project just to let people know about it. Well, now it's a few keystrokes, and you can let thousands of people know. I also found it, in some ways, it made my social life easier because it allowed the possibility of connecting with lots of people for brief periods of time, whereas sometimes you just want to say hello to somebody, but you end up stuck in a 20-minute phone conversation that you don't really have time for. And I still love to get together with friends, but it's nice to be able to say happy birthday in 10 seconds and move on with your day. It's absolutely nice to go have dinner with your friends and spend an evening and really catch up. But some of the more mundane aspects of connecting with people can be done so much faster now. What I found most valuable, though, is that it expanded my horizons. I decided fairly early on that I had a choice. I could either be like I think most actors are when they start getting a little bit known and be very private. I am a very private person, but I also decided that I didn't want to be a closed-off person. I protect my privacy, but I try to be as open as I possibly can. And I just decided that on social media I was going to be accessible. There weren't a lot of actors who were just wide open to have a conversation with anybody who came along, and real conversations, really engage. And I decided I would rather be that kind of person than the kind who, built up as many walls as possible around himself. I still don't want people showing up at my doorstep unannounced, and I keep my privacy.
So there's a line there. There's a line there that you've got to draw.
Yeah, but I just decided to draw the line as close to me as possible, to let people get as close as I could comfortably allow. And it's really been one of the most rewarding things in my life to know that I've got hundreds, if not thousands, of people I really feel a connection to, even though we've never met. There are hundreds of thousands more people that the only connection we have is, they like my shows, or they send me tweets that say, "Hi, Bobby," or whatever. But my circle of friends and acquaintances has grown immensely since social media came in, and I really like that. It would be hard to have this many friends and acquaintances that I enjoy talking to if we had to talk on the phone in order to connect, or if we had to meet in person in order to connect. And social media allows me to have quick connections with lots of people and to have them as in-depth as I care to have them.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. You said your IMDb trivia page may not all be true, but I read that you're the son-in-law of Don Adams, obviously famous for Get Smart. What kind of character was he in real life?
He was, I knew who he was because I grew up watching Get Smart. And if you told me when I was a teenager that I was going to end up married to his daughter, I'd have thought you were crazy. But I did meet and fall in love with his daughter, and we got married. And he was an interesting man. He was one of the funniest people I've ever met. Just a comedy genius. He wasn't necessarily an easy man. He had complicated family relations with all his children, and I liked him. He was sometimes hard to get along with, but in general, I liked him, and much to my wife's surprise, he liked me too. I don't think she expected us to get along, but we were both former Marines, and we were both film history nuts and history nuts, and so we had a lot to talk about. We didn't have a deeply personal relationship, but he didn't have a deeply personal relationship with many people. But on the surface, we had a lot to talk about, and for the most part, we enjoyed each other. So it was, like I say, it wasn't an easy relationship, and he didn't have a lot of easy relationships, but it was fascinating, and it was colorful, and I laughed an awful lot with him. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
If he was around today and could see the convention circuit and what you just explained about social media, do you think he would get involved in that kind of lifestyle if he was, like, say, your age?
I don't think so. He was a deeply private person. He did a couple of things where I think he did a one or two autograph shows, and I don't think he enjoyed it at all. The fact of the matter is, for a performer, and especially for a performer who started out in stand-up, he was not terribly comfortable in front of an audience. I think he much preferred doing shows like Get Smart, where the only people he had to deal with were the crew. I think he was rather, in a weird way, rather shy. I think he was very nervous around fans. I mean, he could put on a good face and be open and funny and charming and all that, but I don't think he was very comfortable with it. And in a million years, I cannot imagine him on Facebook. It was hard enough to get him on the phone. He was a very private person. All the years I knew him, he lived by himself, and he watched Law and Order reruns and went to the track, and that was about it. He would have dinner with his family, but he didn't have, a wide circle of people that he liked to get together with. He was kind of a homebody, at least as I knew him. I only knew him the last 20 years of his life, so it may have been different before, but my experience was that he was extremely private.
You also wrote, we get back to George Reeves, you wrote a biography of George Reeves and the whole Reeves family, which has quite a depressing story. We obviously know about Christopher Reeves. Mm-hmm. What fascinates you about George Reeves and that whole family? Well,
I grew up with the George Reeves Superman show. I mean, it was my favorite show as a kid. I was always fascinated. I was always puzzled by the idea that the guy who got to play Superman would kill himself. And but it was just kind of a casual interest. And then, as I began writing film history, I got caught up in his story and felt like it might make an interesting book. Well, the more I dug into it, the more I realized it would make it interesting. And let me correct you, I haven't finished. I'm still working on it.
Oh.
I've been working on it for years and years and years. My own career has become kind of an obstacle to completing that book.
That's a good obstacle.
Yeah. I mean, it's, as obstacles go, getting to have a career as an actor is pretty good. But I still work on it. I work on it pretty consistently, and one day I will have it finished and have it out. But I was always intrigued, especially as I began to have a career myself as an actor. I was always intrigued with the idea of what life must have been like for an actor who wasn't a superstar in the sense that Brad Pitt or George Clooney is. In other words, George Reeves was never an actor with lots of money or power. He did the roles he could. He ended up playing Superman because it was offered to him at a time when nobody else was offering him it. And in some ways, he got a weird deal of the cards because he got to be famous without any of the power or riches. And that always intrigued me, to become successful in a way that doesn't particularly help you is kind of a weird paradox.
Well, how many people back then were, especially in Hollywood, were successful and rich? There wouldn't have been a lot of money traveling around back then, would there?
Well, I mean, certainly the big stars, Clark Gable and Gary Cooper and John Wayne and Marilyn Monroe, they were bringing in huge salaries. But, George Reeves was pulling in, a few $100s a week at a time when $200 was nothing to sneeze at, but it wasn't wealth. You know, I have a middling career in terms of the money I bring in, and I've got a much nicer house than George Reeves had. You know, he had fame, but you know, if he had been, for one thing, the Superman show was a syndicated show. It wasn't a network produced show, so he didn't. It wasn't the same as Lucille Ball on I Love Lucy, where she owned the show and in fact owned the studio and was making millions of dollars a year. He was not making anything like that. So he had a hard time walking down the street without being recognized. At the same time, he couldn't pick up the phone and say, well, I want to do this movie, and have anybody pay any attention to it. And in fact, quite the opposite, because he was so typecast. And in those days, if you got recognized for one role, it was really hard to break out of that. Nowadays, people jump all over the place, and film actors can do TV, and TV actors can do film, and just because you get, well, look at Christopher Reeve. When he played Superman, it didn't stop his career at all. In fact, it helped him. Whereas George Reeves, no relation, was his career stopped with Superman. Nobody would hire him to do anything else. And that's how much things have changed over the course of 20 or 30 years. It's very different now, and nobody looks, well, you know, Timothy Oliphant and Ian McShane were the two male leads on Deadwood, and they became very well known for those roles, but neither of them has stopped working at all, and in fact they're working more than ever. In the 50s, that might have been the end of their careers, because people would say, oh, we can't hire him, he's out swearing from Deadwood. I think audiences are more sophisticated, and the studios are more sophisticated about audiences now. And there's so much inside information available about TV shows and movies now. We've seen so much footage of behind the scenes that I think nobody thinks, oh, that guy is that character. And that wasn't so true back in the 50s. People had a lot harder time separating the actor from the character, and often it was detrimental to the actor's career.
Are you ready to get into some fan questions? We've got about 5 fan questions, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, terrific.
So from Shane, he is from South Penrith, which is in New South Wales, near Sydney. He wants to know, what was your favourite season that you worked on Supernatural, and who was your favourite cast member to work with?
Oh, that's tough. One reason it's tough is that partly because I've done so many episodes, and partly because of the way we shoot, where everything's kind of out of order, it's hard for me to separate out sections of the show. It's kind of all one big, long episode to me. It's hard for me to remember who directed what episode, or which storyline got wrapped up in which particular episode. It's kind of like one really, really, really long movie. And so I don't have a particular favorite season. I can tell you the season I kind of liked least, and that was season 5, because I was stuck in the wheelchair for most of it. And just technically, and because of the restrictions that put on the character, I didn't have as much interesting to do, and it was always harder, you know, getting around the set, you know, moving over cables and things in a wheelchair. Fortunately, I was lucky enough to get up out of it at night and go home, but which not everybody is fortunate enough to be able to do. But even that season, which was a little less interesting for me specifically, even that season has some of my very favorite episodes in it. The episode Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid is in season 5, and I absolutely loved that episode. And it kind of segues into what you were talking about. I got to about favorite actors. I love all the people on the show. I have a really close feeling for Jared and Jensen and Misha and Kim Rhodes and Mark Shepard, and all of the people I worked with repeatedly on the show, I feel very close to. I really, really loved working with Carrie Ann Fleming, who played my wife in Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid and in Death's Door. I really connected with her. We're extremely close friends now as a result of working together. So of the people who haven't been on the show a lot, she's one of my favorites. And I love working with Kim Rhodes. We have so much fun when we're working together. But I have so much fun with Jared and Jensen and Misha and Mark. It's one of the most fun shows I've ever worked on. Every show is fun to a certain extent. Every show is enjoyable. Some of them are more so, some of them are less so. Some of them are much, much harder work and don't necessarily have a lot of warmth attached to the company. The Supernatural, it's not that at all. I think we all kind of adore each other. So I couldn't pick a favorite any more than I could pick a favorite sister.
Michael from Rosemead, California wants to know, my question for Jim Beaver is, are you a fan of supernatural-themed television shows? And if so, then what other show would you like to do a crossover episode with?
Well, I don't watch a lot of television, first off. And I'm not personally a big fan of fantastic or mystical or occult or supernatural type shows. The same way I'm not a particular follower of science fiction. I like various examples of those genres, but I don't spend a lot of time watching any of them. I don't go out of my way unless I've heard something is really, really good. My tendency, what I enjoy most is straight dramas. And but that said, I'm always happy to do one if somebody wants me to. And because I have both some friends and some people I really, really respect on American Horror Story, I'd love to do one of those. And if they wanted to do a crossover with Bobby, I'd be fine with that. I almost got to do a couple of episodes of The Walking Dead back in the season, and I would have loved to have done that. That seemed like a pretty cool show, although I've never really followed it. So, yeah, there are shows that I would like to do, but I don't necessarily watch them.
John from Valdosta, Georgia, wants to know, what were the difference in dynamics with working on Supernatural and the dynamics of Harper's Island?
Well, let me think. Well, the big difference with Supernatural and Harper's Island, even though they were shot in the same city, is that Harper's Island was very much an ensemble show with a lot of characters. Some of us never even had scenes together. Supernatural is basically a show about two brothers and the small circle of people around them, and the focus is always largely on the brothers. And additionally, there was a real loosey-goosey kind of quality on the Supernatural set. There's a lot of banter and joking around and kidding around, and probably a little too much wasting time having fun. Most shows, frankly, aren't like that. Most of the shows I've been part of. That doesn't mean they aren't lighthearted a lot of the time, but Supernatural's kind of like a family picnic where we occasionally get some scenes shot. Most shows are a little more formalized. I mean, everybody works hard on Supernatural, don't get me wrong. We work hard and we get our days shot the way they're supposed to, but there's always a kind of jokey atmosphere. And that wasn't so much the case on Harper's Island. And a lot of it was because we all came together in this large cast. We didn't all work together, and we were all new to each other at the same time. A lot of us became really close and good friends, but we only did 13 episodes of it. By the time all of the ice had broken, the show was over. So it might well have gotten just as loose as Supernatural, but if we had, if there had been some way to stretch the show out for more seasons. But when your initial premise is that you're going to kill everybody in the cast, it's kind of hard to have season 2.
Rebecca from Melbourne, she wants to know she wants to ask, pretty please, could you come along to Melbourne's All Hell Breaks Loose, a Christmas special? For those that don't know, Hub Productions, she thinks that's right, are hosting a special Supernatural con in Sydney and Melbourne. Satan himself will be there.
Well, I would love to be there. I have not been invited. I think that's because I was just there in Australia. I would love to go there. I love Melbourne. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. But I think Hub Productions may have plans for me later. And I know that all of the conventions like to kind of mix it up and not bring the same guests over and over within a close period of time. So unless something happens or maybe somebody drops out or something, I probably won't be at the Christmas special in Melbourne as much as I would love to be.
And one from Biljana, who I think you met in Sydney.
Oh, yeah, I remember Biljana.
She wants to know, Jim, what are your best and least favourite moments on set? That's the last question. Well, last fan question.
Well, I presume she means on the Supernatural set.
Yep, we'll go with that.
Yeah, for me, the best moments are any time that everything's really working well. As much as I love the comic moments in Supernatural, I'm really kind of a dramatic actor at heart in a lot of ways, and I really like the deeply emotional stuff when it comes up. I mean, it's a close call. I really like the funny stuff too. I really like sarcastic Bobby and bouncing one-liners off the boys. I really enjoy that. I just really like it when it's working well, and when the writing is good, and we've got great lines to say. It just makes me really happy. Did she ask my worst moments?
Yeah, best and least favorite.
Oh, least favorite. Well, my least favorite moments are always the last scene I shoot before I'm done for a while, especially the last few years where I've only done one episode in seasons 8, 9, and 10. And the day I know I'm gone for the rest of the season is always my least favorite moment, because I enjoy so much being on that set, and I enjoy that crew and that cast so much. It's always really hard for me to say goodbye. I always know that as long as the show is on, there's a pretty good chance that I'll get to go back. But I really miss the days when I was there a lot, when I was there 10, 12, 13, 14 episodes a season. That was just heaven for me. It's been great doing all these other things I've gotten to do. You know, I wouldn't have been able, if I was still working at the same rate, if they hadn't killed Bobby off and I was still working as many episodes a season, I wouldn't have been able to do Justified. I wouldn't have been able to do Dexter or Breaking Bad or Crimson Peak. So I'm really happy for those opportunities, but I really miss the ongoing, day-to-day, consistent work there. So my least favorite moment is always the end of the episode when I know I'm leaving.
And finally, where can people find you?
Well, I'm in my bedroom at the moment, but please don't come looking. No, I'm on Twitter. My handle is Jumble Jim, not Jungle, Jumble.
With a B.
JUMBLEJIM. I'm on Facebook. I've got a personal page that I try to restrict to family and friends, but I have a fan page on Facebook as well that is open to anybody, and I try and put the same stuff on both pages. So you're not missing out by not being on my family and friends page, because I put almost everything, unless it's a very specific personal thing. I put almost everything on the fan page too. So you can find me there. I'm on Instagram. I don't do Instagram very much, but I'm there. So, and like I said, I try to be open and available. I don't want anybody climbing in my windows, but I'm absolutely delighted to converse as much as I possibly can on Facebook and Twitter and whatever else they come up with.
I hope you've enjoyed the interview. It's gone for quite a while. I hope you gained as much out of it as I did. I love talking about history, so the history of Hollywood. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Jim.
You're absolutely welcome. I enjoy it very much.